Four, please, on the pod from Weston, Florida, Jake Marsh, the play-by-play broadcaster, Barstool sports personality, sports biz reporter, whatever hat he may have on. Jake Marsh coming on the podcast. He really, I'd been following him, but he popped onto my radar in the golf space, doing a lot more PGA Tour Live this year. We haven't crossed paths the same week doing PGA Tour Live, but seeing all that, I just wanted to have a conversation with Jake and get his opinion on a lot of what's going on in golf. No real agenda here, just two guys talking about the sport, where it is, what it's like to broadcast it, and where we think it can go and where younger people may have their role in the sport. Obviously, he has seen the digital side of things at Barstool Sports and the Foreplay podcast up close, works on the Pardon My Take podcast. So he has seen a lot of what is possible in digital content, how to create really good digital content. So we talk a little bit about that while analyzing the PGA Tour and everything golf. So Jake Marsh coming on Eyes on Golf right now. You probably know him as a play-by-play broadcaster for Barstool Sports and PGA Tour Live. Also a part of the Pardon My Take podcast. I don't know if Jake, I would call you sports biz reporter any more specifically there, but Jake Marsh is with us. Jake, thanks for being on Eyes on Golf.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, PMT Sports Biz is still my Twitter. I think at this point, I'm just going to go with it and keep it forever. And those who know the origin of it will have a little knowledge under their belt.
When your parents' friends ask you, what do you do, young Jake, for a living? What do you tell them?
I tell them that I am fortunate to have a very small role on the number one sports podcast in the country, Pardon My Take, combined with the fact that I'm continuing to chase my dreams as a national network play-by-play broadcaster. That's always been the long-term goal. They've always known that here. And day by day, trying to climb my way up the ladder.
I'm sure your parents' friends understand all of that. Speaking from my experiences, but a reason I wanted to get together and talk to you. I saw you start to do more PGA Tour Live recently. I know you'd done the Korn Ferry Tour broadcast with Barstool last year, and then I was talking to our mutual friend Bradley Peacock, who deserves a shout out here, who's I guess our host at TPC Sawgrass, our illustrious young 20s host.
Yes.
At TPC Sawgrass. And I was like, I just got to chop it up with Jake. I just got to talk about golf with Jake, because I imagine we have a lot of things that we see the same in the industry, agree with. We might have some things that we don't. But I want to understand a little bit about where you stand in golf. And I want to start, for people that might not know your story. I kind of gave it to you in the notes, but for someone to go from South Florida to Syracuse for college, to Vermont, to Barstool in New York, to Chicago, there's a lot of different. That is the life well traveled already for you. So what is your story in getting into the sports media industry?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, officially, thank you for having me on. Been watching and seeing a bunch of clips of this podcast, and I'm honored to be a part of it right now. Yes, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, look, as any kid did, they want to become a professional athlete, and when the realization comes that that's not going to happen, you pivot to other things. And for me, as with many other people, you watch sports and consume sports all the time, and you're watching games at home and you think, that's pretty cool that you get to go to all these places, talk about the games, travel to amazing venues, meet great people. And it caught my eye. I actually started my sports media career, you could say, on the newspaper side. I was a student newspaper sports editor for Cypress Bay High School in Weston, Florida, which is one of the biggest high schools in the country, 4,400 kids. So kind of like a mini college. I was a sports editor, then I was the managing editor, then I took the next step in going to Syracuse, and that's when I went all in with broadcasting. And I know you, as a Northwestern guy, we have this little rivalry we can push aside for the time being. But yeah, I've been all in on the broadcast side since it's about to be 10 years since I started college, which is crazy to think about. And just day by day, trying to call as many games as possible, get better with each rep I get.
My fiance did go to Syracuse. She's Newhouse class of 2016, so I've kind of waved the truce flag. Not that she was doing sports over there, more of the TV, radio, film side of things. But I have, I'll root for Cuse. I will tell her that Northwestern has made 2 straight NCAA tournaments. Syracuse has not. I was going to say when we started, I feel like I'm punishing myself putting a Florida Panthers fan on the podcast. Right after what happened to the Rangers, but then you're coming to us from PFT commenters' seats, so we've got a Capitals banner behind you, so we can hate on that together. But I think that's a great start to the story. I do want to ask one question about being in Vermont, the Catamounts. What happened there when you, I guess, had to tell them that you were moving on to Barstool? What was that conversation like?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get that job right after college. I was the radio voice for men's basketball for UVM. First season, unbelievable experience. Made the tournament, 13 seed, lost to Florida State, tied at the half, but it was so exciting to be part of that, sitting on the selection show, traveled, got to go to Kansas, Louisville, Virginia. We won pretty much at the buzzer at St. John's in New York City, which was really cool. But then after my first year, I stumbled upon this internship opportunity at Part of My Take, and I was able to do both for a season, do Part of My Take remotely, and do UVM year 2. And then COVID hits March of 2020. I become full-time at Barstool, and it was an unbelievable experience. Wouldn't change a thing about it. And I've made some great relationships and connections there, along with some great broadcast experiences too.
Were you a Florida or Florida State guy? Was that a big
I'm
win?
A Gator.
Okay, so that was a really big win for you on the Vermont side.
Yeah.
All right, now let's get into golf. That's a great explanation of how you got to where you got, and we can you mentioned being sort of the sports biz reporter at Barstool, and that being your niche in a way, and moving into, I would say, muscling your way into calling play-by-play, whether it be the bowl game that Barstool had the rights to until recently, PLL. And then all of a sudden, I look up, you're calling the Barstool Mini Golf Open. You're calling whatever people are doing in the office, it feels like. So starting to do play-by-play and doing a lot of those sports, and then doing golf, right? Doing the Korn Ferry event last year, which was more conversational, and then doing PGA Tour live events this year, which is more of your traditional, not fully traditional, but more of your traditional golf broadcasting. What have you noticed that's been different about calling golf?
Yeah, golf is more different than any other sport I've called. There's really no comparison to what calling golf is, but it has quickly elevated up my power rankings of favorite sports to call. It's just so cool because you look at Thursday, that's when you can really dive into the stories of these players and the personal sides of things. And then the drama keeps getting more intense day by day, shot by shot, to where you get to Sunday afternoon and it could be a life-changing weekend for someone that you're calling, where 3 days ago they were seeking their first tour win. And it's just really cool seeing those stories develop. The fact that, yes, it's a little more quiet than any other sport, but there's still those opportunities to get up and get loud and get excited. I was fortunate enough to call Max Homa eagling from 200 plus yards out at Quail Hollow last month. And it's like, that's really cool. Like, you can get as loud as a football game or a basketball game in those little moments. But you also have the quiet story time. So I just think the mix of it and the ebbs and flows of it make it very unique.
Yeah, I mean, there's a different sort of, you're calling a bowl game, right? I mean, the energy, it ebbs and flows a little bit between plays, but it's definitely more consistent in the building. There's no quietness. Golf and tennis are the only sports where you have those moments, maybe a big pitch in a playoff game that gets like that, but it has a different sort of cadence about it. How have you adjusted kind of your own personal energy? And we go, like, I always tell people this, Jake, that people who call TV, they come to PGA Tour Live and they're like, how do you guys work these 10 to 12 hour days? And I always say, I don't know any better. I've never actually been out there calling Golf Channel or NBC or CBS. So when you have to keep that energy up or maintain that energy for a long period of time. How have you adjusted to that?
Yeah, well, first off, I was blown away by the operation of PGA Tour Live and how everything runs behind the scenes. So obviously, you and I both know, but for those who don't, you're on the air. The broadcast itself is on the air for 10 to 12 hours a day. But the way they run it is flawless. They have 6 sets of talent rotations so that you're never on the air for longer than 3 hours at a time. And they give you your breaks and your rest so that you're really never burned out, so that when you are on the air, you can give it your all. And they do a tremendous job taking care of us on that end. But I think just appreciating what you're doing. And again, this could be me and us just being still younger in our careers and taking a step back sometimes and thinking, wow, this is really cool that we're calling the best golfers in the world at these major tournaments, and we're just getting to tell the stories.
Well, I feel like I got to cut you. Just be careful with major tournaments.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the word major, these important and signature tournaments.
Very good.
I guess you could say. But yes, you're right. Thank you for correcting me. The word major is used differently in the golf world. But it's really cool. And I think just having that perspective gets you through the days and keeps you excited for each broadcast.
This is an independent podcast, but there are certainly some people who might be listening that are going to be happy that we hammered that terminology out.
Yes.
In terms of the Korn Ferry event last year, so you guys, the event in Chicago last year, the NV5 Invitational, you got a chance to call. And it was kind of, I watched, sometimes you're all of a sudden calling a shot like a professional broadcaster. And then the next thing I know, Francis Ellis is running a comedy show down on the course. So I'm trying to navigate everything as a viewer when that was going on. As that being your first foray, I'd assume, into professional golf, what did the Barstool team learn, and what did you learn during that event?
Yeah, first off, I have that event to thank for getting on PGA Tour Live and any other future opportunities I'm lucky enough to have in terms of calling golf, because that's where I made my connection to get on PGA Tour Live. Shout out to Greg, who is one of the big names to know running behind the scenes at PGA Tour Live. He happened to be on site for the MV5 Invitational, and we kept in touch that week, and he approved of my work there despite all the shenanigans, and he offered me the opportunity to call events for PGA Tour Live. Greg Hoffey, yeah. So I have him to thank. I have that entire production crew to thank for giving me, I guess, my first foot in the door in terms of calling golf. That event was so much fun. I mean, obviously the Korn Ferry Tour doesn't get as much press as the PGA Tour, but it's interesting because calling that event last year and then this year on the PGA Tour, I remember a lot of those names from my first golf broadcast, the 30 tour cards that are handed out. I've kind of, I guess you could say, moved up with those guys because you remember calling them at that level and now you're calling them there. So it's really, really cool. Like when Jake Knapp won his first tournament earlier this year, he might not be a big name to a lot of people, but I remember talking to him at the driving range at the Glen Club about his Mighty Ducks sleeve and his former bouncer story. It's like, whoa, that's pretty cool. I kind of had a head start in learning about these fascinating stories that these players have.
Yeah, I think that's a great, also for those who might be listening for broadcast tips, that's a great tip for anyone that ends up at the collegiate level, ends up in calling minor league baseball, calling G League basketball, whatever it may be. Korn Ferry Tour being the example for golf, because you just never know who you're talking to. You never know where these guys are going to end up going. So I think that's a great lesson in itself. But also, I think you guys did a great job that week telling stories of the Korn Ferry Tour and treating those guys like they were PGA Tour players for Korn Ferry Tour. And I think that can't be, I think that, I was just talking to my fiance the other day about, you think about a player like Rory, how many times his story has been told, how much money he's made. And then you think about some of the guys that were qualifying for the US Open the other day and all of the stories that we're about to cover for the next week that we don't know. And I mean, as you've been able to see full days of golf, How have you noticed sort of that element of the game, that there are all these players and personalities that might not get the scrutiny, but when you do call featured holes or you call featured groups on the weekend and all of a sudden, Scotty Scheffler's playing with the guy who finished 24th on the Korn Ferry Tour list last year. How do you notice the discrepancy maybe in the way that we tell stories in golf?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the casual golf fan, they're aware of the top 20 to 30 guys, right? They know the
Mm-hmm.
Tigers, Rorys, Max Homas, and Scotties, and guys in that category. But I think where PGA Tour Live really can't be compared to anything else is that you have the exclusive opportunity to tell the story of these guys who are up and comers and that are going to become winners on the PGA Tour. Like, we're fortunate to pretty much cover every guy who's playing in any given tournament, and you're going to be able to look back one day and say, "Oh, I remember him when blah blah blah." So it's really cool when the whole world's watching at these first two majors so far this year. We're
Mm-hmm.
recording a couple of weeks before the U.S. Open, and you're watching the tournament. You can look from first place to 144th place or whatever it is, and mentally you're like, oh, I know about him, I know his little story. Like, it's really cool just learning about all these guys, and some of these stories are so fascinating. I mentioned the one about Jake Knapp. I mean, there's so many guys where it is so hard to get to the PGA Tour.
Mm-hmm.
It is nearly impossible, and the fact that these guys made it, it's just a privilege to be able to tell their stories.
Yeah, you start being able to tell, I always, Justin Lauer has been on this podcast. I always tell my stock answer for him. If I have if I have one thing that I need to get something in. He's on a par 3 on featured holes. Justin Lauer, the 2010 NAIA champion at Malone University. Jake, who doesn't know that?
Yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
these little things like Mark Hubbard, that is his Twitter handle is Homeless Hubs, because that was essentially how he felt about his golf career early on. You start understanding Patrick Fishburne and Chad Ramey in ways that other people might not know. And then if those guys take off next week, like you said, at the U.S. Open or something, you're ready to go there. And so on PGA Tour Live, we've got the main feed, we've got the marquee group, featured groups, featured holes. Like we're saying, you get to see a lot. You get to watch guys play 18 holes that you might not normally get to. You might not sit there and watch every shot. When you've watched players, some of the best players in the world, take every shot in a round, what do you notice that you didn't see before?
I notice the attention to detail they have and how much emphasis they put on each shot. Like, guys like you and me, maybe I'll speak for myself here. I'm a 19 handicap. I'm out there, occasionally can break 90, but usually in the 90s or trying to avoid 100. And a lot of times I'm just stepping up and hitting the ball. But those guys, they can't get away with that. Do they have the luxury of a permanent caddy and all of the details on any given course? Of course. But this is literally their lives on the line. If they don't make the cut, they're not getting any money. So the attention to detail is what I'm blown away with. And it's also funny, the threshold of what's considered a good shot to me versus to them. If I have any green in regulation, I'm a happy man. But if they're 40 feet off for birdie, but still on the green, they're not happy with themselves. That just shows what their standards are.
Yeah, we definitely get to see the conversations with caddies. We get to see the body language in a different way. I mean, if we're on Marquee Group is one of the streams that's always just one group, top group on PGA Tour Live. I mean, you get to see them, the entire process of analyzing the shot before, which for some people, for golf junkies, this is something that, in the 3 years that PGA Tour Live has moved over to ESPN Plus, has been a whole new form of content that people had been craving. So that's opened up a new chapter. I'll segue. You brought up your golf history a little bit. I was just telling someone the other day, like, I played a lot of baseball and golf growing up. We used to go to South Florida around the holidays. My dad would always point out the kids playing on the field. He'd be like, Jeffrey, don't you wish you could play baseball year round? And it used to make me feel like, how am I ever going to catch up with these kids? So growing up in South Florida, what was golf like for you?
Golf was everywhere. I was fortunate to live on a golf course, the third hole at Weston Hills Country Club's Players Course, where I would go out at twilight and just screw
We're not
around
going to
and
get you
play
in
that
trouble.
hole. Yeah. Sorry if that, I mean, we don't live there anymore, but yeah, I'd imagine a lot of people who live on courses go out when the course isn't really busy, and get some practice in. So a golf course was staring me in the face every day when I got home. So how do you not get involved? And I went to junior golf camps and played in tournaments. Obviously, was never good enough to take it too seriously. But golf was everywhere for me. It's always been so much fun. I mean, growing up in Florida, it's hard to find someone who wouldn't play golf regularly.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I feel like when I was growing up, my friends knew I played golf. They knew I watched golf. You never felt like you were cool in school. At least when I was in middle school, high school, I ended up playing high school golf my senior year. It never felt like I was not cool. Claire Rogers talks about this all the time. You're not cool lugging your golf bag around high school, especially in the Northeast. Like it just wasn't a thing. So, when you think about yourself watching golf growing up, was it something that in your family was priority? Like I know I grew up in a family that Father's Day plans revolved around watching the U.S. Open. What was it like for you growing up?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm the only one in my immediate family that plays consistently. My dad played in business insurance outings as a lot of people do, but um, I was the one who was most into it. I don't know if it was from going to golf camp or just playing with friends, but I played a lot more golf with aunts, uncles, and cousins than I have with my immediate family. Um, I don't know. My dad's just a diehard Yankee fan. He lives and dies by
All right, we'll
baseball.
approve that. We'll approve of that. We'll approve of that.
Yeah. So with him, it
2003
was
must have
always
been
just,
tough for him.
it was interesting. Yeah. But yeah, golf has just always been a part of my life. And he obviously still supported what I did in terms of my golf life. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
How has watching golf for you evolved over time, especially being at Barstool, where golf is at the forefront of a lot of what the brand does? How have things changed for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the ways to watch it have changed. As you mentioned, the PGA Tour Live and ESPN collab is going well. And obviously, we're very, very excited for the new studios. I'm counting down the
We're
days.
biased. We're biased. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, the new studios next year are going to be incredible. I think it's just the options and the ways to watch, right? We talked about the 4 different streams that we have at PGA Tour Live. And then obviously the linear television takes over for the afternoon and when the leaders tee off on the weekend. So I think that's changed a lot. I think the data is crazy. ShotLink is the coolest thing I've ever seen, I think, as a known
Mm-hmm.
sports stats nerd guy. Um, you can find literally anything on there. I don't know how we would call these tournaments without ShotLink.
It's for those that don't know what Jake's talking about, we have really in-depth data, strokes gained data, distance data, everything you can ask for, like he's saying, during a tournament. It's basically how we ask our parents, how did you drive before GPS?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what I would think. But yeah,
Yeah.
we have so much, and that's where it definitely, the way that golf, I'm saying professional golf is being consumed has changed. Now, you guys at Barstool, like I don't know if Dan Rappaport's like the bouncer of foreplay, and how clicky the golf sort of setup is where you guys are. But obviously, you've got the foreplay guys. You've got yourself, who's very involved every time there's something that needs a golf broadcaster. So how have you fit in with all of that, and how has Barstool kind of evolved golf content in itself in terms of not pro golf, but in terms of YouTube golf, podcast golf? I don't even know, we'll call it digital content for golf.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing I've learned about golf content is that no matter how good or how bad you are, people will watch.
By that you
It's
mean
true.
at golf, not how bad the content is, but at golf.
Of course, yes, yes, playing golf. No matter how bad you are as a golfer, people will watch. I do my 9 holes in 90 second series where I'll go out, film an entire round, and piece it all together for a rapid fire 90-second 9-hole round, and I'll shoot like a 52, and people will be like, "You're the worst golfer who's ever touched the club in their life," and then I'll somehow get a 2 on 17 at Sawgrass, or be fortunate enough to film a hole in 1 last summer, and people will say, "It's fake. That didn't happen. Prove it to me. You're lucky. There's no way." So no matter what, for better or for worse, golf content moves the needle. And I think that's what a lot of us recognize here at Barstool. At Part of My Take, we did a speed golf video last summer. We did a silent golf video, and people just love watching people play bad golf. And it's captivating no matter what.
Makes them feel better, also feels relatable. I know I've started to do a little bit more of play a hole with me content, and I was talking to James Nitties, who's a former player himself who does PGA Tour Live, and he was like, "I want to do that, but I want to shank shots." And this is a guy who played on the tour for a couple of years, and I was thinking about that as I had a couple dicey bogeys and doubles that I've recorded, and thinking about how to position when I do share that. And you talk about your play a 9-hole. I know I saw your 9-hole series at TPC Sawgrass at Stadium, and I think you did Dyes Valley. And I was talking to Bradley about it, and he's like, "Yeah, Jake comes around. He's got the pole, which I assume is iRange Sports. I don't know if you want to give them a shout out." And
shout out iRange. Yeah.
Sticks it into the ground, just stabs it into the grass, and just films every shot. And so I applaud you for doing that. I don't know if I would have the patience to do that. Do you have any stories of, it looked at least like TPC Sawgrass, you played with a bunch of strangers. Do you have any stories of people being like, "What is this guy doing with me right now?"
So before I tee off on the first tee, I just say like, "Hey guys, I do this video series. I'm just going to film myself. It won't slow us down. It won't change the pace. But if you have any issues, let me know." And I haven't had an issue with it yet, which is great. But look, does it take a little bit out of the fun and relaxation out of the golf round? Absolutely. There's a lot of moving pieces. You're always worried that you're going to slow down the pace of play, and you have to carry the club along with the phone, along with the burner phone I use to film, because if I use my regular phone to film an entire round, it would die. And then stick it in. I also have to look at yardages. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but I think the end product, knowing that I will forever have a full documentation of a 2 at 17 at Sawgrass, and in addition to that entire round, I'll always be able to look back at that, and I can always go back and just enjoy myself and play it again, which is a nice luxury to have. But just knowing I have those memories forever makes it much better.
What club did you use for the 2 at Sawgrass?
I used my attack wedge.
Attack wedge.
Yeah. So I think it was like 111 that day. But I just wanted to make it on, and I would have considered it a success. When Chris Berman came on Part of My Take, he said that his rule is if you make it on, you pick it up and you write down a 2. But I played it out and I still got a 2, so I was fortunate.
I like that you call it an attack wedge, not an approach wedge. Feels more aggressive.
Exactly.
So did you get, now at Sawgrass, for people that don't know, when you play it, they give you, when you start the stadium course, they give you this little thing to put on your golf bag, the badge, and you can, at the end of the round, get the score and the date put on it. So do you have it saying number 2?
I do. It's on my bag right now. I think I have a picture of it. I got to pull it up for you.
But while you do that, I got a par and I got the 3, but I forgot to put the date on. So it's just a 3.
Oh. Yeah. That's still amazing though. A 3 at 17 is
very, very casual to say that when you just made a birdie at Sawgrass to say it was a 3. Let's see. Yeah,
actually there is no date on it, but it's still really cool.
All right. Well, we have the video that's dated, which is great for this.
Exactly.
And when you're putting out this content, I mean, some people have never seen the stadium course, especially, or people have seen the stadium course, but they haven't seen maybe holes 1 to 16 or 18. They haven't checked as religiously as 17. So what sort of comments and feedback do you get from that?
A lot of it and this is what I've noticed as someone who's been to Scottsdale, but only for the tournament, is that it looks very unrecognizable, with no stands and all of that. Like I've seen videos and pictures of people playing 16 at Scottsdale, and it looks like just another par three.
Yeah.
And obviously, the island feature makes this one stand out a lot more. But it's just so cool, just thinking about the history and everything that's gone on at this tournament. And you go back both before and after, you watch YouTube highlights of 17 at Sawgrass, and it's just like, whoa, like I was literally just there.
Yeah, I mean, you see 16 at TPC Scottsdale when Tiger played it and had the hole-in-one in '97, and it looks different than it does now. I think Augusta is the one that people, if you ever see Google Earth images or ever see videos, there's not a lot of footage out there or pictures. But if you ever see the pictures of Augusta without the crowd, you don't even think from above, especially without the undulation. When you look from above, you're going, what? It's just a hole with two bunkers. Like, what's the big deal? Totally changes the way that you look at everything. And the Augusta has elevation change that you just don't see from above. I want to talk big picture in golf because you're coming. I have my opinions of where golf should go, where golf content should be, how to fix the game, what I would do as commissioner. People on this podcast have heard some of that. I've shared that elsewhere, but I want to hear from you. You're in charge of golf right now. You're put in charge of the entire golfing world. What do you do? What do you want to see?
I think at all costs, you have to get all the big names back together, one way or the other. Obviously, it's still great to see at the major tournaments, emphasizing the word major, 4 times a year. But look, as great as it is telling these stories about these guys that not a lot of people have heard of, getting Rahm, DJ, Brooks back in the mix on a weekly level would elevate the importance and hype and chatter around the sport a lot more than just the 4 weeks a year where the casuals come in, right? So as cool as it is to talk about these fantastic stories and fascinating and discovering new players, I think first and foremost, you have to get all the names back in the same competitions on a weekly basis.
I think it's obviously it's always going to be easier said than done, and there's a lot of moving parts that are into that. How have you felt the feelings of fans change over the last couple of years? And I think, look, people's animosity changes. One day the fans can't stand the PGA Tour. One day the fans can't stand Live Golf. Like, there's definitely a fluctuation that goes on. How do you think the golf fan has changed in the last 3 years?
It depends. Like there's some people who are fine with how it is right now. Some people who, no matter what changes, they'll still only watch the majors, which like you can't really control that because the reality of the situation is the average American sports fan has their calendar. And we actually talked about this on Part of My Take, where it's like, all right, September through February is football, 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 no matter what. And then you have March Madness. But then April through August is kind of where golf can take over, especially at the majors. So I don't know if they need to play musical chairs with when the majors are, but I think having it like the Masters will always have that second week in April, like right after the Final Four. It's Jim Nantz week. He goes from the Final Four to the Masters every single year. And I think they're doing a good job elevating these signature events. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of fans are watching for the players and the personalities. Like we saw Bryson at the PGA Championship, and he's in the middle of what's been a very surprising but cool 180, it seems like, from the public perception. Like our guys on Part of My Take, he was enemy number one for a long time, Bryson DeChambeau. But Big Cat, one of the hosts of PMT, said, for some reason, I feel myself rooting for Bryson right now. Why? Maybe because it is his personality of him just like talking to himself and pumping himself up. And I think the more big names, personalities combined with the up and comers, like the underdog mentalities, I think all of that coming together is a step in the right direction. But again, who knows how that happens?
Well, I think Bryson is, and I feel like I need to do a whole panel and podcast on Bryson, because there's so many Bryson takes being flung around right now, and everyone. And look, the Masters and the PGA Championship, Bryson DeChambeau was pure entertainment. That's a fact. And before Bryson left the PGA Tour, he was a content electric factory. I mean, there were points though that people need to remember with Bryson that you started to say, all right, like, I think it's too much now, or you're taking yourself too seriously. And I know there's been a lot of takes of, and Joe Pompliano, who I had on here recently, who's a great, I think, an outstanding Twitter follower and has some outstanding insight to things, tweeted something about one day, he said something like, one day people will study how Bryson was able to stay a fan favorite while taking the money and going to LIV Golf. And I would argue that Bryson would be 5 to 10 times more popular right now if he had stayed on the PGA Tour and still created all the content that he's created. I know he would argue that the PGA Tour wouldn't let him do the content, or he would have been too busy with the PGA Tour schedule that would be more dynamic than the LIV Golf schedule. But I think that Bryson would be even more popular if he was playing mainstream week to week. I mean, we're talking right now, he's in Houston trying to talk people into going and watching the LIV Golf event in Houston, where it's going to be 100 degrees this week, and the Memorial's going on and the US Open is next week. It's just not going to happen. But I think that what Bryson has done from the content side, and that if you are a 15-year-old kid getting into golf right now and you consume more of your golf content on YouTube than on NBC and CBS on the weekend, you know Bryson more than you know so many of these guys. I went to a No Laying Up had an event at a pitch and putt here in Flushing Meadows, Queens, Neil's favorite place here. And Allie and I, my fiance, played with two guys, and they were like, who are some other YouTubers you watch? And I was like, what? And this was like 2 years ago. And I listen to No Laying Up as a podcast. I don't consume the YouTube content the way that other people do. Now, what you guys at Barstool, I'm sure, have seen is how big YouTube golf has become. I'm sure that you go to events, some of the Barstool golf events, and, Trent and Riggs are more famous are probably more well-known, but than 50% of PGA Tour golfers, if not more. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem for pro golf right now, or is that just the nature of content across the board?
I don't think it's a problem for pro golf, because if you're a fan of foreplay, and Riggs, Trent, Frankie, Dan, they do a fantastic job, they're covering the events themselves too. So they're still providing great spotlight to some of the smaller name golfers. They had someone on, I think a week or two ago, where they do an amazing job of humanizing and putting the spotlight on those names who aren't really, I guess you could say, the A-list of golf. So if you're following them and they're telling you to watch this person, you're more likely to watch that person. So I think it's kind of a domino effect, and it's only good things.
Well, they had Alistair Doherty on recently.
Yes.
Who, I mean, is an amazing story that he touched on how Barstool has essentially lifted him up. I think it was Riggs that kind of pushed him to keep going. You guys, I think, covered him last year in Chicago, and then he came in second at Myrtle Beach on a sponsor's exemption and got to play a second PGA Tour event, shortly after then.
Yeah, and he was a Barstool golf sponsored athlete, so he's wearing the same gear that we all have in our closets, which is really cool. But yeah, stories like that, where if it weren't for Riggs, Trent, and Frankie and those guys, like, you might not know who Alistair Doherty is, but they're doing a great job providing us with information on why we should watch these guys, even though they're not those huge names yet.
I say it because, I was in esports at one point, and esports, everyone thought was going to be the next big thing, partly because esports creators were gaining, so many viewers on Twitch and on YouTube, not really Mixer when it existed, but, and then, in came professional esports, and they just didn't get the same feedback that some of these streamers were getting. Now it's the opposite because golf obviously started from the pro golf realm and is now getting into more of the YouTube golf world. Live streaming golf competition is coming. I'm sure that's going to be coming with Barstool. So there's a lot of changes that have gone on in golf. Now, we're talking as people who have the privilege of doing play-by-play for the PGA Tour. I know when I come in and I get in the microphone, I'm thinking to myself, what can I do that's different than what has been heard and seen before without breaking the entire mold? We're not trying to change. We're not trying to turn calling live golf, I think, into a podcast. What we're trying to do is just bring it in to a more modern era. So when you're on the microphone now, and when you're thinking about your following, when you're thinking about your own vernacular, your own experiences, how are you adding something different to golf?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and this is something that I've been working on in other sports, and sometimes maybe I do bring it a little bit too much to golf, is sometimes I go over the top too frequently or too much. And obviously, when you think of golf, you think of quiet. And when I lose my mind when Max Homa eagles at Quail Hollow, like, do I regret it? No. Is it different? Yes, because who says you can't get excited when someone makes a fantastic shot? I mean, like, sure, just because a lot of people wouldn't max out with their audio levels doesn't mean you can't do it. It's not disrespectful to the player. Like, it's after the shot, it's celebrating. That's the equivalent of a Hail Mary in football. When a Hail Mary in football happens, the announcer goes crazy. So why can't you show your excitement when something crazy happens to golf or someone drills a 50-footer?
I think that's a good way. And look, I've read some of the comments on some of your stuff, and I'm kind of like, I've seen the same things on mine that, there will be people that will want you to put them to that will rely on you for their nap on the weekend.
Of course.
And not their Jake nap. We're talking their legitimate nap. And, my mentality is I'm not going to be your nap on the weekend. You can mute the TV if you really want. Now I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be Gus Johnson on Thursday morning when a guy's putting for par on the third hole and, the tournament hasn't developed. But I think there's a prime opportunity here to expand golf's reach among a younger audience and, essentially make golf cool. It's one of my biggest things is that golf has become so much more accessible, right? And, trying to invite people in a little bit more. And maybe you've experienced that a little bit too, in terms of understanding, like, are you thinking about, I want my friends who are casual golf fans who don't watch as religiously, I want them to want to watch. I want them to want to watch more than the majors, like you're talking about. I felt like Full Swing was going to be I walked away from Full Swing saying, look, it might not make everyone a diehard golf fan, but it might make some people my friends who say, oh, I just watch the majors, care when Joel Damon or when Scotty Scheffler or when Matt Fitzpatrick is in contention. How do you think golf can reach these reach these people, like those people that say they just want to watch majors? How can the PGA Tour get them to watch more?
Yeah, I think similar to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, it's those exterior platforms that can really help people root for and become familiar with these players. Like we mentioned, Alistair Doherty, when, like, for example, when Part of My Take first had Max Homa on 4 or 5 years ago, he wasn't the biggest name at the time. But then the guys start building this relationship with him. They talk about inside jokes that the fans who are now on the course at the event watching Max, where you kind of develop this friendship where you feel like you know each other, is so cool. So I think the more that these players kind of take that shield down and put themselves out there more, it'll make them more relatable to the fans, which will bring in a lot of other people.
Yeah. I mean, Max Homa is the prime example of this, right? His Get a Grip podcast with Shane Bacon was the first time I really consumed content with him, other than just knowing him as, at the time, a name at the end of the DraftKings list. That obviously, big changes were made. I want to just a couple other things while we're on this YouTube golf conversation, sort of this content conversation. I had I had two of these notes on here for you. Why do people want to watch, the Barstool Mini Golf Open? Why do people want to watch Jersey Jerry bash balls into a simulator for 2 days?
I think not to beat a dead horse, but it's the personality side that makes people so interested. Like, people know how much of a wild card Jersey Jerry can be if you're aware of him, and he can say anything that's on his mind, and it might make you laugh, it might make you scared because he's in the middle of convincing everyone that there's like some phone outage. I don't even know right now, but he's just so funny and so unpredictable that it's just captivating when you get kind of attracted to a personality. You want to see what they do. People love watching Big Cat's teams fail epically because because they just, it's enjoyable. It's Big Cat's always said, he's given me a lot of great advice over the last 5 years. He's always told me, if you're going to fail in spectacular fashion, because that will move the needle more than just being average.
So my senior year at Northwestern, I graduated in 2015. I knew I was evolving. I was going to take a job with the postgame.com, which was a Yahoo Sports site. And they asked me before I graduated to go to a conference in Chicago, Blogs with Balls, and to just kind of learn from people. They paid my ticket. I didn't pay my ticket. And I went, and there was a Twitter beef about the Chicago sports panel that Big Cat was like tweeting at them in 2015 that he wanted to be on the panel. And he wasn't, Big Cat was big, but he wasn't like as big as he'd become. And eventually they said, all right, yeah, you can come on. And he just dominated the panel, and I remember thinking to myself at the time, like, who is this guy? Like, I thought Barstool was just this blog, and this guy just walked in here, dominated the conversation, and kind of became the mayor of the entire conference at the happy hour after. And I think that goes with a little bit. Now, I'm not saying everyone should, try to muscle their way into every conversation, but he could have failed epically at that attempt. And he didn't. And I'm sure there's a few PMT listeners, listening in. What's the best piece of advice that those two guys, Big Cat and PFT, have given you?
I think
as Big J journalists, as they are.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is just, no matter what, just be yourself. Obviously, that's a very cliche saying, but I remember them telling me in the beginning, like, they hired me to be the resident nerd stats guy, and I haven't shied away from that because that's at the core of who I am. So I think just like the audience is very smart. They can tell when someone's faking something, but when I get the feedback that I'm like, this is peak Jake, or this is exactly what I would expect from you, like, that's validation that I am being myself and I am doing what I was supposed to be doing here. Like, that's what makes me stick out here at Barstool, is that it is a media company, yes, but I'm pretty much the only one here with the broadcasting degree.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to another network, everyone's got a broadcasting degree. But I think that's what's kind of made it worked here the last 5 years. And every little piece of advice they've told me, I've held on to.
I think that's fascinating because you talk about being yourself. Sometimes as a play-by-play broadcaster, the honest fact of the matter is you can be yourself to a degree, but if you have, a big opinions on something going on in the game or in the sport, you can't necessarily, voice that opinion. I always struggle with, should I display my fandom that I grew up with out there? We talked about the Rangers at the top. I've covered the Islanders and Devils for MSG. Like, do I want to get it out there that I grew up, born and raised, diehard Blue Shirts Rangers fan? Or do I really need to keep it objective? How do I connect with the audience? So I think that's an interesting, golf doesn't have as much of that because there are no teams, at least for now on the PGA Tour. But you are kind of, you're dealing with that. How much do you want to put, if you know a guy better, if you want a guy to do well, you do have that opportunity in golf to say, hey, we're all rooting for this guy this week or something like that. But it's definitely a unique situation in terms of, as a play-by-play guy, how do you, I mean, what have you learned? How do you go as far when you've done PLL? I don't know if you have developed relationships with certain players or teams or anything like that. How do you stay objective on air?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the core of what I bring to the table here. Like, they'll ask me to give my opinion on some things during the show, and I tiptoe around it because I don't want to put my reputation in jeopardy, because I want this long-term goal of calling games on a big network so badly that I don't want to have to be known for having any baggage or being unprofessional. And when I first started as an intern, I showed up every day in a suit for a few weeks until Big Cat said, I don't need to do that. Just so, because that is one of the biggest priorities I have, is keeping that reputation uh, intact. Because as you know, and as anyone in this business knows, like, it is very, very difficult to make your way to the top, and you get one shot and you're going to go all in with that shot. And right now I can proudly and confidently say I have no regrets, and I'm proud of what I've done so far in my year since graduation.
Well, I always say, they used to say dress for the job you want. Now it's share content for the job you want. So obviously you did a good job with that at first. And, that's why I've evolved so much of my content to really focus on golf specifically. And that's, as we finish up here, a couple last questions. I mean, one is, as you think about yourself in golf, we've talked a little bit about what, I asked you what you want to bring that's unique to the game. And I guess following up on that, where do you want to go with the game? Golf is very unique in terms of how its rights are sold, but it's also unique in terms of how much content you can make around the game. Like, you can't necessarily have a compelling 3-point shootout with Stephen Curry, but you could do a great chipping drill with Max Homa. So where do you want to go in the game?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first and foremost, calling PGA Tour Live this year has been an amazing experience. I've been fortunate to do 3 so far this year. My first was ironically in my hometown, Cognizant Classic of the Palm Beaches, hometown-ish. And then I did the Zurich
There's
Classic
a West
of New
Palm Beach
Orleans.
airport, and there's a Fort Lauderdale airport. It's a little different.
Yeah. And then I did the Zurich Classic of New Orleans, which was a lot of fun, the only team event on the tour. And then I was fortunate enough to do my first signature event at Wells Fargo. So I've enjoyed all 3 of those. Hoping I get the opportunity to do 1 or 2 more this summer, and then next year would love to be in the mix for even more. So I think calling the play-by-play is definitely the priority. But in terms of the individual content, I love doing the 9 holes in 90 seconds, no matter how bad the internet wants to rip me apart, because it's a lot of fun. It's cool documenting. It also adds a nice little bit of pressure when I'm playing, because every shot is going to get examined by the internet. But it's a lot of fun. So I would love to keep making those videos. As like I said, you could shoot 50 or 150 and people will still be intrigued.
No judgment. Have you taken a mulligan on one of those videos?
I've taken breakfast balls.
Okay.
When there's no range, but yeah.
We're and sometimes
I'll pick up. Sometimes I'll pick up when it's like within a foot. I used to do ball and cup, but I think I'm good for within a foot or so.
It's all right. It's all right. Yeah. It's all right. Yeah. But no, I think that, Jake, that's awesome. We got the U.S. Open coming up. We're taping this, like you said, it's the Wednesday before the Memorial, so week and a half out from the U.S. Open. Have you been to Pinehurst before?
So I've never played number 2, but Riggs was nice enough. Riggs from Foreplay. He has a house on the number 2 course, and he was nice enough to invite us all over when we were filming the Ryder Cup last year. Not the Ryder Cup, the Ryder Cup. It was basically Ryder Cup, but with Barstool bloggers, and we were all in North Carolina for the week. And it was really, really cool. I forget the name of the hotel, but that's where a lot of the guys stayed. The iconic hotel. You probably know the name, but it was awesome. I mean, I went to the pro shop. I got a hat. I got a ball marker. So it was really cool, and I'm excited for the U.S. Open in a couple of weeks.
Was it the Carolina Hotel?
Yes. That's where.
Okay.
Riggs's famous crying video took place, I believe.
What is Riggs? What wasn't it? Riggs? Did Riggs live at Pinehurst for a long time?
During like peak COVID, I think they put him up there at Pinehurst. And then for those not aware, just Google Riggs crying video. He had stayed there for like 3 months, and it's one of the most ridiculous videos that anyone's ever seen. There were 50 Pinehurst employees in a line applauding him as he was leaving.
He basically kept them in business. He kept them in business for 3 months.
Have you seen the video?
I believe I must have seen it like 3 years ago. I know the story that, he basically, that's where he lived during COVID, and there are worse places to be during COVID. I guess before he had this house, he was just playing golf every day at Pinehurst, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think this all circles back to our entire conversation that Pinehurst could stay in business if they really wanted. He was an ad for Pinehurst for 3 months during COVID.
Yeah. Crazy.
It's unbelievable. So that's a whole, but anyway, where I was going with this was, do you have a scouting report on Pinehurst number 2 or on Pinehurst in general that we should know about going into the US Open?
I don't know a deep dive of the actual course, to be honest. I haven't been able to play it. I think Riggs lives on one of the fairways in the front 9. So that's the extent of my familiarity with Pinehurst number 2. I know I need to go there and play the Cradle, which I heard is really fun. But next time I go to North Carolina, Pinehurst trip is definitely on the list.
So what's Riggs going to do? Is he going to have like a party every day with people at his house?
I don't know. I saw something about like a giveaway where people can stay over. I don't know if that's during the tournament. I don't know if a player's renting it out. I don't know. But it's a fascinating dilemma to have.
It's like, I remember when the US Open was at Winged Foot with no fans, Rick Pitino was in someone's backyard, sitting on the stands watching on one of the par 3s. So there are ways, without buying tickets, if people are friendly enough in some of these yards.
Right.
Do you have a pick for the US Open?
Pick for the US Open,
or a players to watch, sneaky player to watch.
Sneaky player to watch. Oof. Who's been playing really well recently but hasn't broken through? Obviously, like Scotty is Scotty, and he's a heavy favorite for a reason. I have my bias picks with Max and Brooks. Let me take a look at the odds while we're here.
Take a look at the odds before we send you out, because I think there's I'm looking at a healthy Ludwig Oberg as sort of the young Colin Morikawa at the PGA or the Open a couple of years ago. No scar tissue yet, just flushes it. You're going to have to avoid the undulation of these greens. You're going to have to hit your target. And I think that there's going to be some flusher of the golf ball who also has a formidable enough short game. If they do miss these greens, it's going to win at Pinehurst.
Yeah. I like the Oberg pick. I remember he had to back out of the Wells Fargo.
He did. So that's why I'm saying we're going to see the health at the Memorial right now. Be careful with that, but that's where I'm leaning.
Okay. Aside from the obvious Scotty pick and the biased Brooks and Max picks, I think it's time for Viktor Hovland to get over the hump.
All right.
He's struggled this year, but at the PGA, he hasn't played since the PGA. He finished in 3rd, but outside of that, he's not had a year that has lived up to his standards, right? His best finish is T19. And for a guy that dominated at the end of last year with the FedEx Cup, he's coming off his best start. He's taken off time since then. I feel like he can keep that momentum going. He's at plus 1,800 on DraftKings right now.
All right. I like that. I like that mindset with Hovland. He's working with Joe Mayo again. You need to have a good short game around Pinehurst. Guys are going to get crushed. There will be the best. My favorite part about this course is you will be watching. If you sit and watch on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the whole day, you will see 10 times that players pitch to a spot that rolls right back to their feet. Or you'll see guys pitch across the green. So it's going to be fun. But listen, Jake, you have given me way more time. I know you got a job that you got to allegedly do. So I really appreciate you taking the time with me. Anything else before we let you go? I know you got a little bit of PGA Tour Live left in the fold. Anything else in golf coming up for you?
I think that's it right now. Hopefully a few more tournaments coming my way this year and next year with those new studios. And hopefully we can meet in person. I know
We got to have them scheduled the same week. Yeah.
I know. So we'll see. But I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm looking forward to the remainder of the golf season this year.
Thanks so much, Jake. Thanks to Jake. Really enjoyed that. I mean, it was funny. Before we started, we were kind of talking about, well, what is this about? And I said, I've had, golfers on. I've had certain former golfers on. I've had people that work in golf biz, people who have specific avenues. But I really just wanted to talk with Jake, and we went longer than I expected, but that was a fun one. I can't wait to be in person with him. I can't wait to work with him, hopefully coming up at PGA Tour Live or in some other realm of the golf space. So really excited to see what he creates with his own golf content, with Barstool Sports, with PGA Tour Live, with play-by-play broadcasting, and wherever else the media road may take him. Thank you to you all for listening. We got the US Open coming up right around the corner. Excited for it. Maybe some US Open content coming down the pipeline. Also, big shout out to Eyes on Golf alum Justin Lauer, qualifying for the US Open. Came on this podcast, said he had never played in a major. That was going to be one of his goals. And now he is going to be a major golf participant at the US Open at Pinehurst. So good luck to him. Thanks again to everyone for listening.